Good morning, AP US History students. It is Monday, January 11th, and today we're finishing the industrial age, also known as the Gilded Age, Second Industrial Age, known as the Gilded Age, the post-Reconstruction period. There's been a lot of talk about Reconstruction on C-SPAN and NPR lately for good reason. So be aware of Reconstruction and the fact that it was an effort to remake the South in the image of the North, to end basically the pervasive cultural perceptions of the South that involved racism. And it didn't work. It was abandoned in 1877 by a president who wanted power more than he wanted social change that would improve American society. Well, that being said, what he wanted is to get back to business. And as you know, we enter a period known as the Gilded Age, in which machine politics are on the rise. Politicians see politics as a way to get rich, like Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed was actually caught in Europe somewhere around 1880, 1878, something like that. And he was extradited to the United States to stand trial. Weird. Just learned that. So you have two perspectives on the concentration of wealth in the Gilded Age. One of those perspectives is that the ultra-rich are captains of industry who have innovation and put their own resources on the line by investing in companies that hire people and build America. The other perspective is that they are robber barons because they are engaged in some forms of philanthropy using the money that should have otherwise gone to workers. I mean, let's look at this realistically. The workers did not have the capital to engage in that kind of philanthropy. What if the business owners had paid the workers the philanthropic money that was spent by the business owners? If the workers had engaged in that philanthropy, they would be the heroes of this story. Anyway, because of the dynamic between ownership and labor, complicated, of course, by the farmers and ranchers of the West in what I described as a triangle of tension, labor unions are going to grow during the Gilded Age, and this will give rise to socialism. We have to revisit that word because your parents didn't learn it the way we know it. And our definition of socialism is really specific. Socialism is, you're writing this down, right? Socialism is the redistribution of private wealth for the public good. It is the redistribution of private wealth for the public good. And some of you are like, that doesn't sound good. You're taking away my money. Well, I don't know if you know this, but we live in a society. Yes, I know. And you drive on roads that are built by that money, and it's for the public good. The police are paid by your money that's for the public good. Fire departments, of so many varieties of things. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act are managed by the money that you pay in taxes. I mean, the government has functions. I could name 100 things and be like, well, okay, I guess we need that. Do we need a military? You want to get rid of the military? Because they're paid for by your tax dollars. So really, the argument isn't whether or not the government has the authority to take your private money and use it for the public good. That's socialism. Guess who came up with that? In our version, Hamilton created that. That's why I call our version Hamiltonian socialism. It's taxes and tariffs to do what the government needs to be doing. And that's both state and local and county and town municipal government. They plow the roads when it snows. They unclog sewers when they clog. They do all sorts of things for you, but someone gets paid to do it because they taxed you and your family. I think the only valid argument is to what degree should private money be taxed in order to provide for the public good. I mean, there are some, I know some libertarians who say, well, people should do their stuff themselves. In China, in the ancient world, if you lived near a river, it was your responsibility to dredge the bottom of the silting river so that the river didn't flood. And if you didn't dredge the bottom of the river and the river overflowed because of you, you were held responsible. But that means you're now a professional river dredger in addition to whatever else you do for a living. Or we could all pay a little in taxes and hire a professional river dredger at a full-time wage for full-time work. It's more efficient the way we're doing it by hiring, people to mow the edges of the interstates instead of expecting private citizens to do it. In any case, we can argue about the degree to which people are taxed. That is a valid argument. In fact, I agree that my government does a lot of things I don't think I want to be paying for them to do. Nevertheless, I think that there are two truths in our definition of socialism. One is the definition. It is the redistribution of private wealth for the public good. The second is that it's valid. It is a valid form of it's a valid economic practice because of the way we do it through Hamiltonian socialism. And all bills of revenue begin in the House of Representatives. And so no taxes have ever been passed without the approval of some form of representative government, whether it be county, state, or federal. Some elected official somewhere had to approve it. And so it's democratic in nature. And for those of you who still don't like it, what you may not like is democracy. You just might not favor democracy. So you need to consider that. The ideas of Karl Marx in his Communist Manifesto, Marx was Russian, of course, they will influence a new group of ideological thought. These people will become communists, and they will denounce capitalism. Communists believe, you should write this down. You got to write stuff down. You really have to. So communism is a belief in the shared ownership of the means of production. That means that if there's a factory, that all the workers share ownership in the factory. If there's a farm, all the workers share the ownership of the farm. Communism is a belief in the shared ownership of the means of production. Now, there are some concerns with communism, obviously. First of all, it's never worked. And one of the reasons is human nature. Let's say that 30 of us work in a factory. We make widgets. And one day, Sally gets sick. I don't feel good. And she stays home. Well, Barbara sees Sally's check. And she's like, wait a minute. Sally's check and Barbara's check are the same check. But Sally stayed home a day because she was sick. You know why? Because everyone's an owner. You all get paid the same wage no matter what. So Barbara conducts an experiment. 4 days in the next month, she gets sick. And she still makes the same money. And everyone sees what she's doing. And now a lot of people don't go to work because they're going to get paid the same because they're owners of the factory. And human nature says, I'll do the least to get the most. So communism provides no incentive for work because you're going to get paid. And ultimately, the factory shuts down because production doesn't meet quotas. People cancel contracts. Human nature is the real problem with communism. In an ideal world with perfect people, it would be a beautiful thing, but we do not live in an ideal world with perfect people. But these communists of the Gilded Age predicted that workers would one day unite and take over the means of production, share their ownership. It didn't happen here in America, and it didn't work in Russia. Didn't work in Cuba, isn't working in North Korea, hasn't worked yet. Anyway, Labor unions aren't communist. I'm just required to talk about the growth of communism and this new economic system. And by the way, communism is an economic system. Do not mix the authoritarian norms that seem to accompany communism with communism itself. Communism has nothing to do, I mean, I know some people have made memes about communism and authoritarianism, but those are different things. You can be authoritarian political left and authoritarian political right, but communism is an economic theory about the ownership of the means of production. So if you use these words wrong in an essay, and tomorrow we are writing an essay, you will be held accountable. So let's talk about some of the labor unions specifically. The Knights of Labor were formed in 1869. They're going to recruit African Americans and have a pretty solid membership base. There is a railroad baron named Jay Gould, who was one of the people responsible for the Panic of 1893. He is going to not only be subject to legal action, he's forced to give up a proposed pay cut for these union members. But he is threatened with violence by those union members, which forces him to give up the pay cut. But the threats of violence and actual violence by the Knights of Labor will erode public support for them. Even though they may have been right that they were poorly paid, that they lived in squalid conditions and they needed to be paid more, they may have been right. But using violence as a tool to achieve their means meant that a lot of public opinion abandoned them. Samuel Gompers is a name you might want to know. There's actually a U.S. Navy ship, a submarine tender named after Samuel Gompers. He created the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, which is still around today. Are you familiar with the Teamsters, the AFL-CIO? Half of it was created during the Gilded Age by Samuel Gompers. These are skilled workers organized into smaller unions like pipe fitters and boilermakers. They are hoping to increase pay and working conditions, but it's tended to be a mostly male, mostly white group. They didn't want minorities, they didn't want women, and that's the history of America. These are white men who sought the benefits of organized labor for white men. And the industrial workers of the world. They're known as the Wobblies. They tend to be unskilled labor. This included very radical elements. And when I say left-wing socialists here, I mean almost anarchists, people who don't just want to tax the rich, but who want to seize the rich's property almost in a late medieval leveling manner. They represented miners, migrant workers, textile workers, and they didn't last. You can't threaten the core of society. Like, you can't say to your boss, we're going to kill you and take all your stuff. That doesn't provide a stable work environment. So the Wobblies don't last, and they were known as the Wobblies. So unions, one of the benefits of organizing into a union is the ability to enter into collective bargaining with employers. That's where one contract is created and it applies to all workers in the union. Employers resist this because employers want to be able to fire at will. They want to be able to give more money to loyal employees and punish those who engage in organized union activity. But a collective bargaining agreement protects workers from the kind of targeted, punitive response that an employer might engage in. So let's consider our teachers' union here in Edwardsville High School. Which teachers, now we have a collective bargaining agreement, that's no secret. But, so we all get paid on a salary scale. We all get rewarded the same way, no matter what kind of performance we give. But if that collective bargaining did not exist, who would be paid more and who would be paid less? I don't know the answer to that question. I just enjoy it as a thought experiment. It's better in class where you shout out names and I'm like, we're not supposed to say names, but you do anyway, and I grin. Yeah, the in-person experience here is always better. because that's a fun conversation to have for me. So striking workers, union members, and the frustrated urban poor are going to stage a protest in Chicago, Illinois, known as the Haymarket Riot. That's in 1886. There are some actual anarchists. An anarchist basically says we need to tear down government and ownership of everything, and if I work at it, I own it, and you can't tell me what to do, and you can't tax me for it. Yeah, anarchists don't really have a sound plan. Anarchists are random action generators. They don't. It's not a good idea to be an anarchist. I don't think if you're an anarchist, you probably don't know what you want. You're just angry at life. So in the Haymarket Riot, there were protests, and the cops showed up, and they feared the bombs would be brought, and they were right. Someone threw a bomb, and the police shot into the crowd, killing another police officer. So because a cop died, 4 anarchists are hanged. Now, these were known anarchists that Chicago had been watching for a long time. But these are not the people who threw that bomb. These are not the people that staged the Haymarket Riot. And so ultimately, this is a way for Chicago simply to eliminate people they fear. And the governor of Illinois at the time, John Peter Altgeld, put an end to the killings, the state-sponsored killings of anarchists. There's a building in Carbondale, at SIU Carbondale, named after him. The music building is named Altgeld, after John Peter Altgeld. There's actually an opera written about this event called Altgeld. Why would I know that? Weird. You may remember this episode where the workers of the Krusty Krab go on strike. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the workers in Chicago at the Haymarket Riot had some valid concerns, but many people in the crowd went about this the wrong way by promoting violence as a means to effect change. That's terrorism. And so the police reacted, the government overreacted, and 4 anarchists were hanged without any evidence that they had done anything wrong. Oh yeah, let's not forget some things I'm supposed to be talking about. I'm supposed to be talking about populism periodically. Well, last week was a week of populism. If you were unaware of the news, there were some populists doing some populist things. And I'll let you look that up yourself. But populism is a grassroots movement where people get together and do something without government leadership or the leadership of formal authority mechanisms. There was a united front for poor farmers, for white and African Americans from the farm communities across the Plain States. We've talked about them as part of that triangle. We're not going to talk about the mining of silver or the circulation of money. We will talk about a progressive income tax, but in the future. That's not today. They wanted government ownership of communication and transportation systems, mostly because the railroad owners were charging incredibly high prices and getting super rich off the labor of the farmers and the ranchers. And that's one of the reasons Amtrak is government owned now. And it's not well run. I think we all know Amtrak's in trouble. But private railroads were run even worse because they were like the mafia. They would extort money from those who needed their services. And one of the things that workers wanted was an 8-hour workday, because ownership could say, you're going to work till the job's done, even if it takes 14 hours. And laborers wanted to say, we have lives at home. We want to be able to make plans. And the ownership said, no, your plan is you work here. That's life. Your life is work here, like a Chinese sweatshop. So let's talk about immigrant workers as well. Were immigrant workers necessary? Of course they were. It was a growing nation and an increasingly large labor pool was needed. But nativism again reared its ugly head in the Gilded Age. We were getting a lot of people from Europe as immigrants, and the public face of this was the New Colossus poem on the Statue of Liberty. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning for freedom. But the reality is, but that in America there are immigrants who are despised for cultural, ethnic, and religious phenotype and genotype differences. Anyone who looks different, sounds different, worships differently, or speaks differently is often considered to be less or bad. And the concept of social Darwinism fed the racial stereotypes of the Gilded Age. Let's remember, social Darwinism is the idea that certain racial groups occupy a niche in society, that some are born to lead, some are born to serve, some are born to work. And like Carnegie thought he, because he was rich and white, that he was literally better than everybody else. He was actually superior to others. You're going to find that during this Gilded Age and the beginning of the 20th century, this idea is only going to grow. So this is a Thomas Nast cartoon. He was a political cartoonist in New York who worked against Tammany Hall. And the great fear of the period is that the Irish and the Chinese as immigrants would swallow and consume, this is Uncle Sam. The striped pants are an indication that it's a white Uncle Sam. And that the America we know as white and noble will disappear because they are being consumed by immigrants. So that fear has always been around. I always go back to John Jay, first Secretary of State. John Jay said we should erect a wall of brass to keep out the Catholics because of their fecundity. I still don't know what fecundity means. But from the very beginning, we had this fear of immigrants and people who were different. So in 1882, America passes the Chinese Exclusion Act. This is to prevent Chinese laborers from entering the United States. You can only come in, if you're Chinese, if you have a family member that's already here. Otherwise, you need not apply. Oh yeah, we got two things left. These two items are those kinds of things that are on the AP test specifically. In fact, everything I've mentioned today specifically is on the AP exam. So during the Gilded Age, one of the things we find that is built in America are settlement houses. Settlement houses are designed to let immigrants live among college-educated people. So if you're in college, this is a place to live that's very affordable, but you have to teach English to immigrants. You have to teach people who don't know how to cook. I mean, basically, you teach assimilation. You teach people how to live by themselves who have never seen a stove, because where they came from, there were no stoves. They didn't have running water. So you assimilate people to American life and teach them English. And in return, you get a place to live while you go to college. The most famous of these settlement houses is the Hull House, run by Jane Addams in Chicago. Frequently, you will see references to the Hull House in AP documents, in DBQ documents. And lastly, Walterrauschenbusch believed that Christians had an obligation to improve the lives of the less fortunate in what you might consider a moral economy, that if you have more economically, you have a moral obligation to help others with it. This is like Carnegie's The Gospel of Wealth, but without being super rich, it's scaled to a more reasonable public population. So if you live in Hell's Kitchen, New York, as Rauschenbusch did, there were a lot of people who needed help. He would encourage middle-class Protestants to create a progressive movement. And you could draw a straight line from the social gospel to the progressive era of the early 20th century. This is one of the impetus for that. Multiple impetuses. Who knows? I ask questions that have no answers. Anyway, you have an assignment in the week 2 folder. You're going to take a look. Let me find it real quick. In the week 2 folder, let's see. Your Zoom meeting link has also been sent to you. I sent that last Friday. But you're looking at Carnegie and the Homestead Strike of 1892. So we've got several homeworks this week. The first of them is about the Homestead Strike. And we think of Carnegie as a philanthropist, 3,000 libraries, research to end war, investment capital, build America through steel. We look at Carnegie and we're like, that's a captain of industry right there. He is our best example until you read about the Homestead Strike. Carnegie said a lot of things in public, and then in private, he's like, nah, murder those guys. You think I'm kidding? Read the document about the Homestead Strike. So that's due tomorrow. And then, so tomorrow, another assignment. And we're going to do the LEQ for this quarter this week to wrap up the Gilded Age, the long essay question. Tomorrow, I will likely just assign the homework and send you on your way without teaching a lesson. On Wednesday, I'll introduce the long essay question. You have a ton of information about the Gilded Age, and it stretches back from before the break. So I worry that if you haven't been taking notes, you are at a massive disadvantage for this long essay question, because you're going to have one night to do it. The nature of this class is that we prepare you for the test, the AP test, and it's a timed exam. And so some things here have to be on a schedule. So Wednesday, you are going to be given the LEQ, and if you have something else scheduled Wednesday, you're going to have to carve out a period of time. That's just the way it is. If you have a job, that's rough. That's rough. Maybe I'll post the LEQ Tuesday in addition to the homework. And then I'll talk about it on Wednesday. I think that's how it's going to happen. But tonight, you're doing homework about the Homestead Strike. Hope you have a good Monday.